Good morning. That's very bright. Okay, before I start, who here is a developer? All right. Who here is a designer? Okay, who hasn't raised their hands yet? Okay, cool. I just I want to be inclusive, make sure that everyone gets to do something. Just be glad I'm not making you all stand up and turn around and whatever. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the web is now of drinking age. This is very exciting times for people who work on the web, who work with the web, or who create the web in some way. Not just because of the drinking thing, because it's just a bunch of electrons and nodes and whatever, but because of what we do on it. It's really exciting. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening, but there's also a lot of challenges in the road ahead and challenges we've overcome. So I want to start with a little bit of history. 1991, World Wide Web basically more or less invented, exact date in dispute. 1993, it was 2 years later that we actually got HTML, the basic foundation of the web, really. It wasn't until 1995 that we had JavaScript be introduced. That was interesting. And then it wasn't until 1996 that we got cascading style sheets. So already we're like half a decade in, we're like 5 years in, and only now have we sort of like established the basic building blocks that we're currently using to build all our websites and applications with, or web applications anyway. So not really a whole lot happened in that time. Then the next 5 years, now we're getting somewhere. Web standards awareness needs to be raised, and people are building all these bad sites, and use this, use CSS, use that. 2001, 2006, next 5 years, we see a lot of standards adoption take place. We see people build more interactive sites using Ajax and all these great technologies. And then in the past 5 years, we've seen a massive rise in rich internet applications and mobile experiences, mobile websites, mobile web apps, etc. I want to talk a little bit about process. And by that I mean the workflow that we use as designers and developers, the process we go through as we build or as we design and build websites or web applications, and how that really affects us. Back in the first decade, what we kind of saw was we had web designers, and they would design a static site. And I put web in quotes because really what these people were they were print designers who came from print and were tasked to be making a website suddenly. And they used the same approach as they did in print because that's what they were familiar with, that's what they knew. And so we ended up with a very extremely static, very print-oriented type of design style. And it wasn't very web-like actually. But that was the early days. And then they would design some static comp and hand it off to a web developer, or webmaster as we used to know them. They would then build HTML pages out of them, and they would use tables, and it would be, they would slice out the images and make spacer GIFs and all that painful nonsense. That was kind of the first decade of the web, really. Fortunately, in the second decade, things got a lot better. We got real web designers, people who understood the medium, understood how the medium worked, and how these technologies sort of like interact with each other. So they were designing much better websites, but they were still pretty static. They were static experiences. They would then hand them off to front-end developers who would build them again, and this time they would build them with CSS, and it was a little bit greater and was a little bit nicer, and okay, we're getting into this whole like semantic markup and accessibility thing, and we're doing the right thing here, and we're making better pages, and we're improving ourselves. It's great. Of course, we started adding a lot more complexity because we had programmers on both the front end and the back end side building complex content management systems, doing front end engineering, doing all sorts of like interactive stuff, and the complexity layer kind of like was raised. It was getting more complicated, and the average website was no longer just a bunch of HTML with some images and CSS, and you could just take it from one server to the other. No, there was a whole infrastructure involved. So that's kind of the second decade. So we've gone from like really low complexity to basically no complexity to, okay, there's some complexity going on. Now, this upcoming decade is going to be, you know, madness, anarchy. Okay, maybe not quite, but there's going to be even way more complexity. The third decade, what we're only just now starting to see is that we're going to see so many different like aspects and pieces and components come together to make just one simple, well, simple, one really complex but seemingly simple website. And this really affects kind of like the knowledge stack that we need when we build these things. And this is the sort of expected knowledge stack for developers today. Now, you really need to be on board with the whole HTML5 thing by now. You need to know what's going on there. There's just no excuse not to be like exploring HTML5 anymore if you're a developer. You need to know CSS 2.1 and CSS 3. Fortunately, no CSS 4 yet for you, so it's relatively okay. But it's coming. You need to know JavaScript. You need to know stuff about progressive enhancement. You need to know the accessibility implications of the way you build things. You need to understand things about page performance because that affects your, the website's Google ranking or search engine ranking. You need to know debugging tools, which ones are good and what you can do with them and how you can actually like identify issues in your pages. You need to understand the concepts of responsive web design. You need to know what people mean when they say mobile first and what WAI ARIA is all about. That's sort of like the expected knowledge stack, and this is a lot bigger. But, you know, really, please know all of this as well. You know, you need to know at least one JavaScript library. You need to preferably be familiar with Modernizer and polyfills and understand how web fonts work and what to do with them. You need to know about grid-based principles, object-oriented CSS patterns, whether or not you should use them, CMS stuff. You need to understand it would be great if you understand microformats and internationalization and user experience design because that even matters for the way you develop things and the way you build them. So much more. So right now we're basically, you know, this is the knowledge stack of the average like modern front-end developer today. And that's a lot more than just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You know, what it used to be 10 years ago. Well, okay, maybe 15 years ago, but still. So this whole thing is like complexity is just ballooning, and our field is also it's reflecting this. We're seeing so many different so many changes and so many aspects explode. Like there's so many open source projects doing so many different things, and so forth and so forth. So I'm going to talk about just 3 topics, really, and they're kind of hopefully suitable for everyone. I'm going to talk about design for the next decade, development things, and also some ideology. So in design, what we currently have on the web is, we have some responsive web design, we have mobile first, there's CSS 3 and 4 coming in, user experience design, content strategy. It's like there's a whole lot of stuff, and it all kind of affects the design process in some way. Who is familiar with anything from CSS 4? Okay, nobody. That's totally fine because no browser supports it yet, so that's cool. But what you need to know, or what you may want to know sometime soon, is CSS 4 is like being developed right now, and it's coming with this. It's adding vertex shaders, and it's turning the web into essentially a gaming environment, allowing us to do much more complicated things with the interfaces, like completely like matrix transformations on any element, folding them nicely, whatever you want to do. Like stuff like that is coming towards CSS, and that's just like, if you think it's currently complex with CSS 3, well, you ain't seen nothing yet because it's going to be so much more complex. Who here is already familiar with responsive web design? Okay, so most people, but not everyone. Quick overview. So quick outline. Responsive web design is basically a set of like techniques, implementation techniques, and design techniques that allow you to use a single web page as like this is your website, or not the whole website, but like this is a single page, and it'll work on every device, whether it's a mobile device or a tablet of some sort or a desktop browser. And that very same page will just adapt itself in layout and design in order to be most efficient and effective on the screen that it is on and show you the content that is most relevant and so forth. So that's kind of like a responsive web design in a nutshell. With mobile first, what we're actually sort of talking about is rather than designing this whole like desktop experience, you know, this great desktop website or web application, and we're designing it and building it and kind of going like, okay, now we need to build a mobile version. Mobile first is really just like, hey, let's start with this mobile version. What are the absolutely most critical pieces of content and or functionality that we need to present to the user? Like, what is the most important thing? Why are they coming to this website or this web application? What do they need to do? Design that for a really small screen and then build out towards bigger and bigger screens only after that. So it's kind of a reversal in the approach. So we have all these things. We have these great like design techniques and patterns that we're currently like figuring out and writing books about, and you know articles and making everyone aware of how to do them. So what do we need for the next kind of like decade? Well, really what we need is like auto-upgrading browsers, stuff that is currently more so than Chrome. What I mean by this is really more like a browser that updates itself and doesn't need to tell the user to restart the browser. It doesn't need to restart. Like, we need something like that, and they're trying to build this actually right now. So hopefully in the next decade we'll see that, where our browsers don't need to be manually restarted all the time. And in the meantime, what we need is more educated users, because the big reason why we need sort of like this aspect of browsers in from a design perspective is that the browsers that our audience uses kind of like limit us, especially limit us in our thinking. They form this like mental constraint, whereas that's actually a pretty bad thing, because we really need to think beyond what our current audience is using and think about what our audience like a year from now or 5 years from now will be using. So we need kind of like, we need to help our users understand that they need to try and upgrade their browsers, stay up to date with latest security and browser updates, because it's, you know, it's important for them to be using a secure browser, especially in today's World Wide Web. But it's also important for us because it helps our field actually move forward faster. And so again, it's like it's important from a design perspective that we try not to limit our thinking to only our current audience and what they're using, and think, you know, our current audience is using like 20% IE8 and 30% Chrome and the rest of Safari and Firefox, and that's about it. We should think about, hey, 2 years from now, what is it going to be like most likely, and how big will that share of browsers, or the audience share of certain browsers that are really modern be? We also need a little bit more holistic web design. Now, who here is familiar with this? All right. Nobody. Cool. This is, who has heard of the Winchester Mystery House? Okay, so a couple people. Now, this is the Winchester Mystery House. And it's from, it's the house of the old gun magnate Winchester, from the Winchester Rifles, who, when he died, his wife thought that she was haunted by the ghosts of all the people who were killed by her husband's rifles. And in order to appease these ghosts that were haunting her, she believed that she had to build rooms in her house for the ghosts, or build out the house, the mansion, so that the ghosts would have somewhere to go. And what she ended up doing is that she ended up ordering construction workers to just build stuff on this mansion, nonstop. Every second of every minute of every hour of every day of every month of every year for I think like 30 years or so, people were working on this house, expanding it with new rooms, doors, and whatever. The problem was they weren't being told like any specific plans or a design or there wasn't like an architect going like, oh hey, let's build a nice gazebo here and a nice patio there and whatever. It was just build stuff. Go and build stuff. And as a result, this house is full of like doors that just lead into walls or lead into the floor below, so you have to be very careful. There are stairwells running into the ceiling, just, you can't do anything with them. It's a really weird mansion. And it was just built, and they stopped the moment the widow passed away. So they were like, okay, damn, we're finally done. I can imagine for like 30 years, but the thing here is that there was a lot of development going on without any sort of like integration with from the design side. There was no architect, again, there were no architects sort of planning things. It was just constant development without any design. And by the holistic design, what I mean is we need a lot more sort of like communication and interaction between the two, and also understanding of what the other's field of experience is and the technologies we work with. So for the designers here, it means know the technologies that your developers are working with and what kind of constraints come with those technologies, so that you don't end up designing stuff that just becomes like either impossible or just really hard and inconvenient to implement, when there's something you can design that also actually does the same function, serves the same purposes, works quite as well, but is actually really easy to implement or works really great on the web medium. And for the developers, it sort of like means more understanding about design and usability, and not thinking it's like, hey, I can make sense of this and therefore it works, which is a common pitfall amongst developers, speaking as one. All right, so on to development. Well, we have countless number of tools. We have so many frameworks and libraries and micro libraries and polyfills and all these things. Just a quick note, polyfills, or shims as we also know them, are really just a tiny bit of JavaScript that try and retroactively shoehorn modern functionality into older browsers to, for instance, make IE6 support border radius. That's what polyfills are. And so we have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of these. Every day there's like a new one being announced, and the open source movement has created, about 1,000 of these easily in just the last year. And we're getting so many of them that it's becoming really hard to like identify which one you should use and what purpose each one is for, etc. So what we kind of need, oh, sorry, this is one of them that I started. What we kind of need is we need better tools in this next decade, more polished tools. We need all these like tools and libraries that are being made. What we need from them is to be more well-designed in presentation towards like the people who are supposed to use them, so that there's there's better documentation, better experience, and better identification of what the tool does and how to use it. But we also need them to be a little bit more like polished altogether in terms of their functionality and how they interact with each other. Especially in the integration with each other, we need them to be more streamlined so that we can just take a couple of these tools and make them work together very well, rather than, hey, I want to use this tool and I want to use that tool, but when I just like combine them, they start creating all these conflicts. Oh, I'm going to write a third tool to bridge in between the two and make it work. It's like, no, we need these tools to be a little bit more grown up, a little bit more mature and refined. And another big thing is we need memory management libraries, specifically unloaders, because right now we have a lot of libraries that do resource loading for us. They take images and JavaScript files and CSS files and dynamically load them in when we need them. But we don't have any really good tools for unloading them and freeing up memory and forcing garbage collection in the browser to happen so that we can use like a single page website and still do a lot of like high resolution photos and then swap them out for the next page when it's something else, and we don't just like create this massive memory leak on our single page. Another part of this is that browser vendors, the developers of browsers themselves, need to participate in this and make memory management more accessible from the JavaScript layer. What I hope / expect to see in the coming decade is more SVG libraries. Who here has used SVG at all for anything? Yeah, like 10 people maybe. SVG is pretty mature on the web right now. It's pretty widely supported. It's like any modern browser beyond like anything newer than Internet Explorer 8 basically supports it. And even on mobile platforms, the Android 3.0 and higher, and iOS, whatever, SVG is getting pretty well supported, and really there's only one decent library out there, and it's Raphael, and even that library is not really that great. This has a lot of like power to it, but it has really like mediocre APIs, so it's really hard to use and to like bend it to your will. And in order to, if you really want to do something interesting with it, you have to be a math genius in order to understand what's going on here. We need better libraries for that, and I really hope to see some. I really expect to see more real-time apps or real-time integration for websites. This is also another thing that's kind of like maturing right now, technology-wise. If you use Facebook at all, you're familiar with Facebook just like automatically updating stuff. But a better example is Quora. Who's used Quora or is familiar with Quora? Okay, so Quora is sort of like a question and answer site, which is it's a really quite well designed and well developed site. But what's great is that it has this sort of like nice growl-like notification that says, oh, hey, so-and-so answered your question that you asked here, or someone thanked you for your answer to that question, and it just fades away again. And like these real-time experiences make us feel much more connected to the website, because it's no longer this thing where you're just sitting there on your computer or your laptop or whatever, and you're just browsing some website, and it's like it's a sort of like static one-dimensional experience between you and the site. Now you're actually going through and you're seeing this site is alive. There's other people using this site right now, and they're communicating with me, and it's it's not quite like a chat experience, because that would be very noisy and annoying, but you get a much more powerful feeling that there are a lot of people also using this site right now, and they're interacting with the same content that you're interacting with, and so forth. So I think we'll see a lot more of these, but I really hope that people do use this technology kind of like in a good way rather than in a noisy way where they're just like, oh, hey, let's do something real time. And I'd like to see deeper browser support. So the memory management thing is one example, and this is really about the browser vendors, really, where I'd like to see us be able to do more with browsers than we currently do, so that we can get to a more like parity level with native applications, which have really deep control over the experience, and the user experience is something that really is going to matter more and more and more, and so we need more control to make sure that user experience is great. And then lastly, under ideology, we have like the OneWeb sort of idea, and OneWeb comes back a lot to that example of the Boston Globe and responsive web design, where I like to also think of it as one URL. The idea being that when you share some piece of content from the web to another person, you share the link, right? The idea is that that link is always there's only one version of that link. It's always going to like work for the user, no matter what kind of browser or device they're using to actually consume that link on. And conversely, it doesn't matter what you were using. so that when you share it, you're not actually sharing like a mobile experience to a desktop user or vice versa, causing like all these issues or whatever. And inclusive design is something that I only just recently wrote up actually as an article. It's a little bit of an exploratory new thing where, like, I like this example that I used in the article. The idea behind sort of like inclusive design and adaptive interfaces is that we think a lot more about the human user than we do right now, and we think about their needs and their behavior patterns and the way they use our website or our web application. And rather than just like propping up the interface as we designed them for the user and optionally maybe let them customize it a little bit, rather than doing that, we let them define what their needs are based on their behavior and their usage of our app. And then we sort of like measure these things and try and get as much feedback from the user in a transparent kind of way where we don't bother them asking for feedback. We just sort of like observe what they're doing and then take all that information and allow our interface to adapt itself to that user. And the example of Super Mario, which was kind of nice that it was mentioned by Karen earlier, Super Mario is an extremely accessible interface. Like anyone can see this screen, and imagine this 25 years ago when it came out and you haven't already played this. You can see the screen and you can pick up the controller and you know what to do. Clearly you're not supposed to walk to the left because you're standing on the left and there's stuff on the right. So you want to walk to the right and you'll run into that little guy and he's kind of like mean looking and he's kind of shaped in a funny way and you probably don't want to run into him, so you jump on him and like, okay, you start to figure out all these game mechanics and how things work. The interface evolves around the user and tells the user what to do without propping up all these dialogues and help menus or overlays or like, hey, do this and hey, do that. It's not telling the user what to do so much as it's showing it. And as a result, Super Mario was, of course, a phenomenal success. It was a lot of fun, but it was also like anyone could play it. There was, whether you were an expert gamer or you'd never touched a game console in your life, you could pick up that controller and play it. And then you would learn it, and then you would be able to play the whole game, basically. And it would get more difficult over time, but it wasn't the kind of game where 5 minutes in, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is confusing, and you want to throw that controller away. Which a lot of games are like today, but more importantly, a lot of our interfaces that we design are like that, where we put up all these features and all these options and controls to the user, and then we're like, oh, hey, this is way too confusing, and we try and put all these like overlays or help screens or tooltips on there, and then try and get users to understand what we're talking about here with all these interface controls. Rather than doing that, we should try and think more about, hey, how can we make this a really simple and accessible experience no matter how familiar you might be with this app or technology. And then the screen went black. Is it just me? Did I just do that? Oh, I probably did. Oh, okay. Oh, that's right, I'm not plugged in. My bad. So the idea is that we start to think more about making very accessible interfaces that then adapt and evolve as we become more familiar and expert users with that interface. It's very similar to the way a lot of good video games are designed. So what we need actually is examples of this. So this is a relatively new sort of concept for our industry. We don't really have a lot of examples of how to do this or anyone doing a good job with this. And I'd like to see more. And I fully expect us to see a lot more over the next 10 years. And another thing is we need to be pushing boundaries as much as possible. We need to think about, how can we do this interface in a way that is completely different from how we've been doing it all along. How can we like break out of this box that we've built around ourselves with experience and think like, hey, what if we do it in a completely different way? Would that work? It may not, but that's what you explore for, and then you determine this works and that doesn't work. But by pushing boundaries, we really start to innovate and explore new territories and come up with really great lessons to learn and really great new ideas. And we need to see more of that in the next decade as well. I mean, we're doing it as it is, but I'd like to see even more of it. Anyone who's seen the recent redesign of Echo.net? Okay, so a couple of people. There's a brand new website this guy in Vancouver made, and it works. It's a completely three-dimensional sort of like level that he designed using just a bunch of elements and 3D transforms and positioning it all. And then as you scroll down on a WebKit browser on a desktop or an iPad, the whole level sort of like changes around and you get to the real interface of the website, and it's a pretty nice experience. It has some bugs, but he knows those and they're announced. But when he launched it, there were a lot of people who just like looked at it and instantly like got all angry and like, oh, it breaks in this way and it breaks in that way and it doesn't work in my browser and doesn't work in that browser. Like, he mentioned that in his post. More importantly, he's trying something new and really pushing the boundary, and we should actually like applaud him for that, because there are some really fantastic ideas in this new website and in this completely new approach to interfaces for a website. And all that a bunch of people are doing is just criticizing it. It's like, no, learn from these things rather than just like attack instantly on, this doesn't work for me. And with that, actually, I hope I've inspired for some new ideas and new concepts. And are there any questions? Cool. No. Thank you. You're there? No? Okay. Hopefully there's still time. Yeah, there's still time to make it to the map attack thing. And thank you very much.